Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're coming from, where you're at today. My name is Joanna Friesner, and I am the coordinator and executive director for the North American Arabidopsis Steering Committee, otherwise known as NAASC. I want to welcome each of you to today's career panel called Pathways to New Positions. This panel is engaging scientists that have been trained in plant biology, also specifically Arabidopsis at some point, and that have fairly recently obtained a post-training position. Our objective for setting up this panel is to provide some diverse perspectives about navigating the job market. Of course, each panelist will speak about their own experiences, which may or may not be fully applicable to you and your situation, but I'm confident that the range of perspectives will be interesting and informative. I'm joined by two members of NAASC who will serve as our moderators. Dr. Anna Stepanova from North Carolina State University and Dr. Adrian Roeder from Cornell University. Before we move on to the panel, just a few quick logistics and housekeeping items. First, I am recording this presentation with the panel's permission, and I will share it on our Arabidopsis community website. I will email participants who registered with the link to the recording sometime later this week, probably, maybe next week. So just a quick note about the structure of the panel today. Following my brief introduction, I will turn it over to Adrian and Anna, who will be asking the panelists questions for about half an hour. During this time, I ask that you hold your questions and comments and save them for the second part of the call. You might want to write down your question on a piece of paper so you remember it. There will be plenty of discussion time, and I will open the chat for questions and comments when we're done with the first part of the panel. When you ask your questions, you can put in the chat the question itself, or you could ask if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question out loud. And when you do ask your question, just note if it's for a specific panelist or if you have a general question for the whole panel. We also have a number of really excellent questions that were submitted during the registration process, and so we will answer some of those as well. The panel will be up to an hour long. However, please feel free to leave earlier if you need to, and of course you can catch up on whatever you missed in the recording. So thanks everyone for joining, and I will turn it over to Adrian.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I'd like to start with asking you, in about 2 minutes or less, please introduce yourselves and tell us what you did for your PhD and postdoc and what you are doing now. And let's start with Natalie.
Great, thank you, Adrian. My name is Natalie Clark. I am currently a computational scientist at the Broad Institute in the proteomics platform. For my PhD, I work with Dr. Rossazani at North Carolina State University, studying Arabidopsis root stem cell development. And for my postdoc, I was with Justin Wally at Iowa State University, studying genomics and proteomics in both maize and Arabidopsis, looking at hormone signaling and also disease resistance, kind of a jack of all trades sort of thing. And I would say the main sort of defining feature of my career in plants was that I was both a wet lab and a computational biologist. So I would actually do the wet lab work and then also do the computational analysis. In 2022, I decided to transition to a fully computational role, and that also led to me leaving plant biology for the Broad Institute. And so now I'm working again with genomics and proteomics data, mostly proteomics data, in a more of a collaborative environment where I focus more on projects involving things like animal models of exercise and also cancer. And thank you for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Cesar.
Thank you, Adrian. So my name is Cesar Cuevas-Velázquez. I am currently an assistant professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, in Mexico City. I did my PhD in Mexico, working in the Biotechnology Institute under Alejandra Covarrubias' advisory, and over there I work with Arabidopsis disorder proteins that accumulate in dry seeds, and I combined biophysical methods to functional methods to establish a relationship between these two parameters of these plant proteins, trying to understand their function. And then I did a postdoc at the Carnegie Institute and Stanford under Jose Stineni as my advisor, and over there I use disorder plant and specifically Arabidopsis disorder proteins to develop fluorescent biosensors to track how the physicochemical environment impacts cell biology. And since 2019, I started this position in Mexico, where I run my lab now. And we try to use these disorder proteins to understand how the environment shapes their structure, how that impacts their function. And also we apply this knowledge to develop novel biosensors for understanding the environmental regulation on cell biology.
Thank you. Heather.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather. I am currently a senior scientist at the plant biotechnology company Mozza, in which we're trying to get plants to produce milk molecules for making cheese, as well as an independent researcher at the Carnegie Institution for Science on Stanford campus. The start of my career actually was in Adrian Roeder's lab, so one of the hosts of today, where I looked at how how epidermal cells get pattern on the Arabidopsis sepal, so that green leaf-like organ that encompasses the floral organs before they bloom. And then after that, I did a postdoc at the Carnegie Institute on Stanford campus, where actually Cesar and I were postdocs together, looking at how disordered proteins may be acting as thermosensors to help plants time when they flower. Yeah.
Thank you. And always good to see you. Justin.
Hi, yeah. Thanks also for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm a longtime Arabidopsis fan. My time with Arabidopsis started at the early age of, I think, my junior year in college. At the time, I was really just interested in cell biology in general, and it happened to be that the lab that I found that was looking for undergraduate researchers was Heike Sederoff's plant genetics and cell biology lab. So it was there that I really fell in love with applying my interest in cell biology to Arabidopsis specifically. It's just a really fantastic model organism. I transitioned to a PhD in Gloria Muday's lab at Wake Forest after my time at NC State, and my research there focused primarily on elucidating the role of redox signaling in guard cells, and specifically how flavanol antioxidants can modulate guard cell signaling, which in turn modulates gas exchange and water loss. I did this in Arabidopsis and also in tomato. Did a few research studies in roots as well. And then that transitioned further into a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill, specifically the Spire postdoc fellowship, which allowed me to combine an interest in teaching and also in research at the postdoc stage. And so I spent about 75% of my time over the course of 3 years doing research on heterotrimeric G proteins in Arabidopsis and how that pathway specifically can facilitate the pathogen defense response. And then the other 25% of my time was teaching pedagogy related activities, which included teaching at UNC Pembroke during the COVID pandemic, which was a wild experience as a first-time instructor on record. It was late 2021, as my Spire postdoc fellowship ended, that I made a very strange turn, strange from my perspective, into the biopharma space, something that I genuinely never expected. I still kind of surprised a year and a half later that I'm here. But I work at KBI Biopharma, which is a contract development organization. And so companies will come to us with a new drug product, and then we will research the process development of that drug before it goes into clinical trials. And so it's a heavily analytical chemistry role, and I don't have a chemistry background. So I have learned so much about industry, about biopharma, and about chemistry over the last year and a half. So it's been a really exciting time.
Thank you.
Very cool. This is a diversity of different paths. And my question for all of you guys is, has your career path been linear and well-planned or more winding and spontaneous? I think an example that Justin just provided has probably shifted a little bit more towards winding and spontaneous. I don't think that's something you anticipated early on. So I'd like to hear all of your inputs as to whether your current position is something that you've envisioned, let's say 10 years ago when you were just starting grad school.
I can go first. Definitely windy and spontaneous. So in grad school and during my postdoc, I thought for a long time that I was going to continue in academia. And then actually during my postdoc, I started to become more and more interested in industry because there are some of the things that I was researching that I felt might have some translational avenues or could actually be applied. So I actually, when going into industry, pitched it as an industry sabbatical so that I could sort of gain another skill set with the possibility of being able to go back into academia. So that's sort of why I'm right now walking the path of doing both an academic and industry position. So
Very cool. Natalie, do you have your answer to this question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely not linear. I always tell the story. People who know me probably know this, but actually before I started grad school, I actually didn't want to work in plants at all. The reason I only have a mathematics degree and not a biology degree is because I would not take plant biology. That was like the only class I needed for a bio degree. And then I worked with plants, for almost 10 years. So that was like step one of not linear. And then step two, how I actually ended up in my current position was I was kind of like Heather in the sense that I felt like I was going to do academia. And then I went to the ASMS conference, which is a big proteomics conference, like one of only a few of the plant people there, gave a talk there. And then I was actually approached by somebody I work with now in the proteomics platform at the Broad Institute. We talked. I received an email after the conference saying, hey, we have these positions. Would you be interested? And something in me just said, why not? Let's just give this a chance and see where it goes, right? And so it was absolutely nothing like I had planned. Like it was fully computational and I really still wanted to do lab work. And it was not working in plants at all. And it was not academia. And I can say after a year that I'm really happy with my decision. I'm really happy in my position. I'm really happy being here. And so spontaneous as it was, I think it was meant to be in a sense.
Wonderful story. Cesar.
Yeah, I think my pathway was more a little bit direct because I wanted to be a researcher since I can remember, since I was in college. And I didn't want to work with plants either because I didn't know the names and the names of the parts of the plant and take care of plants and how to take care of plants. But then I fell in love with this plant. I joined the plant biology lab for grad school, even though I was working more on the biophysical part of the lab. And I feel that my passion was plant biology in deep down. And so it was more direct, though it was not easy in any way. And actually, when I was trying to come back, because I was trained in the US for my postdoc, and I always knew that I wanted to go back to Mexico. But then finding how and where to go back, that was the difficult part. And currently, so I wanted to come back in a research institute where I didn't have to teach much. But then I ended up in this position where I have a huge load of teaching. And also I have to commute for over an hour each way every day. So it is not ideal, but I am very happy also on the position that I have. And yeah, so I would say more direct, but not straightforward.
Cool. Justin.
Yeah, mine was oddly very linear until it wasn't linear at all. I had pinpointed education early on in college as something that I wanted to pursue. I wasn't sure if it was going to be high school or college, but once I got the PhD program at Wake Forest, I figured I was going to try to make a run at being a small college professor. And my experiences at Wake Forest teaching, which culminated into my experience at the Spire program at UNC, all kind of confirmed that I really enjoy higher education. I was on the job market in 2020 for small colleges in particular, where there was a bigger emphasis on education over research. I was really hoping for more of either a 50-50 or an 80-20 split in favor of the teaching. So my undergraduate or my lab would be primarily undergraduate focused. Coincidentally enough, the COVID pandemic had the most serious effect on the small colleges in particular. So despite, I think, 4 or 5 interviews, wasn't given any offers during that hiring season. So there was like a 6-month process between January of 2020, like somewhere towards the summer, where I started to more and more seriously consider industry. But I had kind of pigeonholed, my resume was very pigeonholed towards like a small college professorship. So being competitive in the ag tech space or even the biopharma space, I just felt like such a leap. But again, it took me 6 months of having an existential crisis to at least just consider applying to industry positions. My wife got pregnant with our third daughter in August, and I was really, I ended my Spire fellowship, was still doing a postdoc, and I just kind of started applying everywhere, academia and industry, kind of using the no stone unturned approach. So as I started to talk to more and more industry professionals and getting to know more about what KBI does, I started to see how I could use my interest in education, in particular in industry, to an advantage. And I would say over the last year and a half, have really enjoyed learning something that's been completely different. But it is sad that there's no more Arabidopsis in my life.
Well, really fascinating. It's great to have your options open. That's wonderful. All right, I'm going to pass the floor to Adrienne.
Great. So some of you started to touch on our next question, which is, how did you find your current job and how did you prepare for the interview?
I can go first if that's okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, so this was also a similar way of how I found my postdoc too. So in both my postdoc and also my current position, I found my position by networking at conferences. So as I mentioned at this conference, I happened to chat with somebody at the Broad in the proteomics platform. And I sort of mentioned to him that I was trying to wrap up my postdoc and looking for positions. And so then the story goes, he went back to his group and they have a debrief where they debrief basically all the interesting things they saw at the conference. And so I was apparently an interesting person that they saw at the conference. And so, then of course, the director of the proteomics platform, Steve, basically told my boss, Monty, you need to email this person and you need to try to convince her to come interview here. So I basically got a cold email from the director of the proteomics platform saying, hey, do you want to apply for this open computational scientist position we have? And then the preparation for the interview, since the Broad is more of sort of a middle ground between academia and industry, has aspects of both. The interview was similar to that of like an academic interview in the sense that I gave an hour-long seminar where I sort of summarized my work, but there wasn't sort of the chalk talk or proposing your lab part. That was replaced with proposing projects in the group where I could work or proposing projects that I would develop within the group. But otherwise, the sort of structure and overall interview was very similar. And so since I had already been applying for academic positions, for me, the preparation was really as simple as reworking my sort of seminar I would give more for this particular job.
Thanks.
I can go. So in terms of finding this job, so I was actually the first step was to create a LinkedIn account. So I was just sort of exploring the space of what I could do like outside of academia in terms of industry jobs, and I realized that I did not have a LinkedIn account, and so I created one. And within a week, I had a recruiter that had written me about this company that was trying to put milk molecules in plants. And originally, I thought that this didn't really align with my interests. I didn't really think I wanted to go into sort of alternative food technology. And then I started thinking about it. And so I had been working as a postdoc on protein-protein phase separation. And then I started reading about milk molecules to realize that the structure that they like to go into is actually basically a phase separated body. And all of a sudden I realized that actually this job might be a direct translation of sort of the principles that I had been using during my postdoc. And so I decided to engage with the recruiter, and I sent him my resume or my CV, and he told me more about the company, and it actually seemed more and more interesting. And then he linked me with the CEO directly, since it's a small startup. There are only like 20 people. It's sort of nice. You get to actually have FaceTime with the CEO, and I I really liked how he's actually seemed quite knowledgeable in terms of the science. I really liked the mission that he was pitching. I didn't feel like it was disingenuous. And then from there, I was, I asked him a lot of science questions because I wanted to make sure that if I was going to work for a company, that the CEO had a decent understanding of the science that was going on at the company, since a lot of times the CEO is primarily just on more or less on the business, giving grand pitches for things. And then after that, I talked with the CSO, so the chief science officer, as well as the other senior scientist that was there at the time. And it seemed like it was a good fit in terms of my interests and the interests of the company. I think for preparing for an industry job, especially if you're going for an early stage startup, I think this is obviously different if it's a more established company, to really understand what is the culture, what is the burn rate? Are they going to be running out of money, right? It's a risky business to be going into. Are they planning on filing for patents? Like actually asking more about the business and sustainability side of the company. But as well as going into the deeper science, sign an NDA, ask as many questions as you can, because you want to make sure that even if they have great ideas, they actually know how to tackle those ideas. So that's my advice.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can mention the way I did. So I learned about these positions by email. So in Mexico, there are very few places where you can do research, and especially plant-focused research. And I was lucky enough that when I was planning to go back to Mexico, because I had a hard deadline because of family reasons, a few of them were open, and yeah, so I decided to apply to most of them, most of them, yeah. And the way that I prepared for the interview was by practicing talks with the lab. The lab was very supportive and very good. My postdoc lab on doing this, and we usually have this type of presentations because other people in the lab were also applying for academic positions, and so I had the opportunity to on a regular basis get the insights of input to them, but also input for me when I was doing my own practice. And also one of the things is that the different positions that they were open that I applied in total 3 of them. They asked for different things, different aspects, and it was kind of difficult in that regard because I was only interviewed by one of the places, and I wasn't really sure what to expect out of the interview. And the way that the interview went was that they asked me not to talk much about my previous research, but what I was planning to do in the future. So that was a little challenging because it was so thinking on the future and how things you can do in this particular place and how you can manage or handle the research with the heavy teaching load that we have. But yeah, that was my story.
Thanks.
I can give my 2 cents worth. I was on the job market first in academia, and there's 5 or 6 different websites that I would use to look for job postings for different colleges across the country. I'd say it's very comparable being on the academic job market and industry, in that in both cases you want to research the department and the company, or the department and the university, and make sure in your application materials and also in your interview that you're asking questions related to what are the interests of the people who are interviewing you. So learn about the department culture, the university culture. When I was interviewing at KPI, I wanted to learn about how do the different branches interact, how do the different departments interact, and just actually feel, act like you're interested in what the person who's interviewing you is doing. And hopefully it's a genuine interest, otherwise why are you doing the interview? In industry, it was to get the interview is so difficult because it's also true in academia. It's difficult anywhere, but I know in industry in particular, you have to write a resume and a cover letter that is appealing to an AI computer, an HR rep who's not a scientist in most cases, and a hiring manager who is a scientist. And they're all going to want very different things. And I failed a lot in the early stages. I think my first 50 applications were never viewed. But I started to send out my materials to other industry professionals that I had networked with over the past, and was able to get better at writing succinctly, just hard as it for an academic. And then I also went really heavy, as Heather mentioned, heavy into LinkedIn. I started a LinkedIn profile, I think in July, and I spent hours on it because I had to do it from scratch. And I made sure to fill out every single word count because I know that companies look for job candidates on LinkedIn using algorithm word searches. And so I wanted to make sure every word in the English language was in my LinkedIn profile. It's a little bit hyperbolic, but I applied to every job that if I was even 50% interested, I applied to this job, mostly via LinkedIn for industry. I just found that most jobs have postings in LinkedIn as well as elsewhere. So I just chose to look at them on LinkedIn. And despite all of my efforts to apply for jobs on LinkedIn, the job that I got, I never applied for. I was contacted by a headhunter that I'd never met before. So before that, I actually interviewed for a biotech company that I thought was going to be a really good fit. It was imaging rats, and I have a lot of experience imaging plants, and I was super excited to learn this new way of imaging. And 5 minutes into that interview, I was told I would be a bad fit because I didn't have experience in X, Y, and Z, which was very clear I didn't have experience. My resume clearly, didn't say that. Anyway, that was a very frustrating experience. Contrast that with my first interview at KBI. I went into that interview knowing that I had no experience doing anything that the job ad said, which is like, why would you apply for a job that you can't market yourself at? Like, in industry, you want to make sure your application material uses every single buzzword that's in the job ad, or you're not going to make it through the filters. So when the headhunter contacted me and said, hey, I've got this job, you'd be a good fit, I said politely, thank you so much for your interest in my profile. I don't think I match this job at all. I am not a chemist. And he said, I think this would still be a good fit. And I was like, well, it's no skin off my nose. It doesn't cost me any money, and it's also a good experience. So I let him go forward and apply for me. Oddly enough, got a phone interview, and it was during that phone interview that I made sure to list every single technique that that KBI was asking for, and then list an alternative technique that I do have experience in. So I'd never done ELISAs, but I've done this chemiluminescent-based assay that uses plant discs. It's not even remotely the same thing, but like it's also technically challenging to get good data from this other assay. So I wanted to find some comparison where I could speak to my background and being able to learn new assays quickly and generate good data. And I was also very forthcoming, mentioning that, hey, I don't have a lot of experience with these assays, but here is my demonstrated experience learning new things and working as a team. And fortunately, that was what really showed through. So I was able to get, I think, about a 4-hour virtual interview with various people. And I had this dreaded PowerPoint presentation. I had to present my research for 20 minutes. My research is very plant focused, and it's very microscopy focused, and it's very biology focused. And I was like, I gotta convince them that I'm not just a plant biologist, not just a microscopist, but I can do other things. So put a lot of work, made sure that was very well practiced and rehearsed. And ultimately, they didn't really care what my background was. They wanted to see how well I can present material to a wide audience. Because what we do at KBI a lot is present material to our clients who are, some of them are scientists, some of them are project managers. In the small companies, we often will present to like a CEO or a CSO. So some people with varying levels of science backgrounds. So I didn't know that at the time, but yeah, that was what was really highlighted there. So
really fascinating. Okay, so I'll take this next question. So let's talk about job prep. What are some of the things that you wish you had known prior to applying, or maybe the things you wish you had done to prepare for the job?
I can go. For job prep, I actually reached out to all of my industry friends, asking anyone to give me advice. I had no idea what questions to ask, what I should expect, how to negotiate salaries, like anything. And it's something where I love academia, but you are not sometimes taught how to deal with job opportunities or prospects that are outside of academia. And so that was very valuable. So if you are at least going for an industry startup position, reach out to any friends who are in those positions. I also, for my job, I got it during the pandemic, so I was unable to actually go to the lab in person and visit. And I lucked out that it was a real lab, but I would highly suggest, if given the opportunity, to go check out the actual environment that you are planning on working in. See the lab, talk to as many people at the company as possible, try to see if you can have lunch with even the other like researchers that work at the company, and just really suss out the culture.
Great advice. Cesar, do you have any insight?
Yeah, so one of the things that I wish I had known how to prepare better for the job is to learn how to handle things that I don't have the ability for at the beginning. So of course, teaching, you don't get real training on teaching, on research, and then but you kind of know because you were taught by people and things like that. But then that's not the most really difficult part. The most difficult part for me is how to organize the admin stuff. So I do a lot of admin work here, and navigating that, it's very challenging because you have to go through to previous hirees that they can show you how to do this process, or how to request for a fellowship for a student, or how to request for space in the growth room, or how to request for this or that. And just navigating all that was really, really challenging. It still is, and that's the I think the most challenging thing, and the thing that I would have liked to prepare more. I don't know, maybe trying to get and this is maybe an advice for trainees to, if you want to go into this academic positions, then focus on acquiring these multitasking capabilities, but not just for research that maybe we're used to, but also for handling people, handling admin stuff, and yeah. So I think that's what I would have wished to know prior to joining this job.
Good advice. Thank you. Natalie, do you have something that you want to contribute?
I don't really have anything to add above what others have said. I just want to echo, I think both Justin and Heather said this, that knowing who you're going to work for and knowing something about them is very important. And in my group with new hires, that is always asked, what do you know about our group, and have you read our papers, are like the first two questions that are asked by anybody. So I definitely second that advice, is really important.
Yeah, in my own experience, same idea. You have to know the company or the institution that you're applying to. You want to have done your homework by the time you go into an interview. Look up people, who you're going to be talking with. So take advantage of knowing who your interviewers are going to be. I'm going to give a chance to Justin to chime in. And after this, we're going to move in to opening the discussion to all of you guys, the participants. If you want to start typing in your questions, if you wish in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask questions after that. Justin, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just have a quick point. I wish I was more open to different careers earlier on. Even though I was really convinced that I wanted to be a small college professor, I should have at least explored other options, or at least gone to different workshops, networked, I don't know what, but just maybe had a little bit more open hands. And so my advice to younger scientists and students especially is, like, you might have like your top one or two jobs that you're pursuing, and you should keep pursuing those as best you can. But that doesn't mean you should just not go to a workshop or not go to an event because you're not going to pursue that. You have no idea how your interests will change, how your life will change. And my experience over the last, really 5 years has taught me how much diversity is out there in academia, in government labs, and then especially in biotech. It's like, almost an unlimited number of different types of jobs and companies and projects and positions that all have their pros and cons. And you'll never know what's out there if you only pursued like a single path without at least considering other options. And so, yeah, leave no stone unturned.
Good advice. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. We
So-
do have a few more questions
Yeah.
in our in previously submitted questions, but I would like to actually for you guys to get a chance to ask any burning questions from the audience.
And while we're waiting for that, I do want to take the moderator's prerogative and ask Cesar one question that I don't think will be long, but it was, I was struck by your job preparation while you were at the Carnegie and doing what I think many of us in our labs, we would recognize, which is giving our practice talks to our labs. And so you were doing that. And, but what I was struck by was the fact that you were doing those talks, I assume in English, but you were preparing for job interviews in Mexico, which I assume, but I could be wrong, that you mostly are speaking Spanish. So I guess my question was, could you speak to any extra challenges that you had of navigating science in the two different languages, unless I'm incorrect, but I'll just let you take that.
No, yeah, you're correct. It is challenging because you also, in some places, we were specifically asked to write the proposal in Spanish, right? So for some of the, it was easier for me to actually write my research in English. So so I did that for some of the applications, but for others, I had to change this to Spanish. And it is challenging to manage this because at first it is hard for a non-native English speaker to go and be trained in a place where the language is different, and then you learn all the different words and the way to say things in a different language. And first it's challenging, but then you adapt. But then when you have to come back and apply and trying to transmit your research now back in Spanish, it is also difficult because you start to use these English words that you think fit better to say what you want to say, and then it depends on the place. But there are some researchers that are more senior that don't like that, and they say no. If you're given or you're delivering a talk here in Mexico, you have to adjust everything in Spanish, and of course, yeah, even there are some words or topics that are better in English. So currently what I do is that, so all my slides are in English, and unless I specifically ask to do this in Spanish, I will change it, but otherwise I will mostly do this in English. But yeah, it is challenging, and you need to have sort of two mindsets in your head to refer to one audience on the different audience and all that. But yeah,
that's fascinating. And there's so many, science is so international, and even though a lot of it can be centered around the English language, and I'm thinking like conferences in particular, there's so many scientists that are really multilingual and multicultural. And so I know that a lot of postdocs move around the world, and there's so many people that really have to navigate these different cultures and different languages. And then I never really thought about the going back. You may go back to your country that you came from, and now you're kind of retranslating in your head a culture and a language. And I mean, it's pretty amazing that you do that, but I can imagine it just adds a layer of challenges to all your job prep and how you're working with scientists in collaboration. So that's pretty fascinating. How about I pull out I don't see anything, and if somebody wants to raise their hand, you can raise your hand, but I'll pull out a question that was submitted. I'm gonna try to find one because you guys have answered so many of the questions already. So here's one. Interesting. I know it'll be totally personal and it's your own opinion. Here's a question. A lot of people want to know, how would you decide if you're more suited for academic or industrial research? And again, I think this is very specific, but you guys might have some cross-cutting thoughts about this. And so I think I'll start with Justin, because he is currently in industry, as is Heather, but what do you think about how someone might decide that?
I think, well, for one, you might not ever really know until you do it yourself. Which I think brings up a point that maybe it's just something that I struggle with, but I think a lot of people also struggle with this is thinking that the job that you're going to take after you're done with your school is the job that you're going to retire in when you're 80. And that it might be true if you go to a university and you love that place, and that's certainly a very common thing. We have folks in my department who have been there for 12 years, but it's also kind of rare. Especially in industry, to stay in that one company for more than 2 or 3 years. And when you're like earlier on in your career, you just have a lot of flexibility as to where you go. So just because you go and take a job in industry doesn't mean you can't apply to be a professor in 2 years, or do something that Heather's doing where you have kind of feet in both camps. It's not the first time I've heard that story. So that's one thing. That's just one option. But I would say another thing. Like, let's just say like you don't want to waste time. I would talk to as many people as you can about what they like about their job, what they don't like about their job. Being at KBI, we're a contract development and manufacturing organization. And so the work that we do is probably going to look a lot different from what Mozza Foods does, what Heather does over there. It's going to look different from what Syngenta does. We're very much like highly technical assembly line. The job isn't to learn all the interesting features about how this antibody targets cancers in canines. The job is, how do you develop this molecule at a large scale that is safe and effective and at cost as quick as possible? That's the job. So if that doesn't appeal to you, then it might not. If you're looking for like a highly technical, highly science discovery type job, then a contract development organization might not be interesting to you. That's actually why I didn't think I would be interested in this job. But having done it now, I've kind of reevaluated what I find interesting, to be honest. What I find interesting is being in a mentorship pipeline where I can grow young scientists up and give them advice based on my experiences, and presenting complex data to a wide audience. And turns out you actually end up doing that no matter where you go. So that was really beneficial for me, but something that I didn't quite discover until I was at KBI and realized there's a lot of opportunities for science communication here. And I actually think science communication is more interesting to me than maybe the more technical lab based activity. So that just happened from experience, and also happened from talking to as many people as I can.
Thank you. Heather, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I thought many of the points that Justin made were spot on. I think the only thing that maybe I would add to that is I think maybe changing the narrative a little bit. Like for me, I really evaluated what I needed from a job to make me happy. And it turns out that both industry and academia, many aspects of it sort of fulfill those requirements. I needed a job in which I was working with other people. I had come from we had all come out of the pandemic where everyone was pretty isolated. I needed a job in which I felt that I was able to be creative and think outside of the box. And it turns out that both academia and industry allows you to do that. I find the job that I'm currently doing to be extremely creative. But I think the main requirement for me personally was that I just felt like I needed to learn something new. And if I decided that industry wasn't the right fit for me, I had created some channels that would allow me to better come back into academia. I've stayed connected with my network, and I think it doesn't. You don't have to choose. Well, I mean, you do have to choose, but you're not stuck in that choice if you decide that you don't like it. And I think I just want to reiterate that, because I think Justin really hit on that sentiment of your first job out of academia or out of your PhD or your postdoc is likely not going to be your final job. And if you decide that you want to try something and you don't like it, you can go back. Just make sure to sort of keep your network, try not to burn bridges. And yeah, there are always opportunities to go back if you really want to.
Wonderful points. We now have a few questions in the chat. So Adrienne, you want to take the first question in the chat?
Yeah, so the first, well, Luis, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Or I can just read
Sure.
it. Oh, good. Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, my question is that, you usually hear that you shouldn't take rejections too personal, like applications, grants, fellowships, and that kind of stuff. But really, that's not an easy thing to do, right? So what's your personal approach to, taking rejections? Especially since you guys mentioned that you already went through several applications and before landing one job, right? So what's your personal take on this?
I would like to answer real quick this. So my approach is probably not the best one, but I do take it personal at first, and I try to use that anger to be better, to improve on what I did wrong before. So what's wrong with me? And then I try to approach this as I proved them wrong, so I will do better next time and do that. So in the end, it's fine. I mean, I relax after several days, after all this rejection, and but I think feeling that a little bit, it's been positive to me. But then, yeah, so eventually you realize that it is not. Most of the things it's not personal, but I use this to motivate myself.
I can also add to this. I think that you should mourn sometimes positions when you don't get them. I had applied to a couple professorship positions, and despite putting in my best efforts, it didn't pan out. And that was okay. And I allowed myself to feel sad about it to a certain extent. And then you sort of, then sort of what Cesar said, you have to figure out how to move on. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily, you shouldn't take it as a personal thing. I mean, we're all human, so you're going to take it personal, but sometimes there are a bunch of great candidates, and there's nothing that you could do. There's a little bit of luck in landing any type of position, as well as, right? If you have 10 perfect candidates, how do you choose? So I think just don't be so hard on yourself. All you can do is try, and if you don't get it, you can either try again or explore another avenue. So,
yep. Whenever one door closes, another one opens. And just if you think of it as whatever happens for the best, because there's something better down the road waiting for you, then it's somehow easier to get over the rejection. All right, let's move on to the next question. Is there a difference between an industrial postdoc and working in industry? That's, I guess, to Heather and Justin.
Yeah, I actually interviewed for an industrial postdoc at Syngenta. Oh, actually, no, I was offered an interview. It was the same day I accepted a job offer at KBI. So I had applied to industrial postdocs. I would say my personal belief about postdocs in general, whether it's academia or industry, is you really need to have a good reason to do it. Same thing for PhDs. Too many students come out of undergrad and say, I'm going to go get a PhD, and you ask them why. It's like, because I'm a biology major. It's like, that is a complete mistake. Same thing with a postdoc. If your goal is to do a postdoc because you now have a PhD, you're not thinking, I think, strategically enough. You need to do a postdoc to learn a specific set of skills. And so you want to find a postdoc that will let you do that. So I chose the Spire postdoc at Chapel Hill because in Alan Jones' lab, I was going to learn a lot of new molecular biology and biochemistry skills while building on my background in microscopy. But I was also going to have the opportunity to do some teaching stuff as well. So that was really, really important. I would say the same thing is probably true of industry. I never ended up doing an industry postdoc, but I know that that is a super flexible career path. So you do a postdoc for a year, maybe 2 years, and you can go into industry, you can go into academia. I know, Gloria Mude, my graduate advisor, she did an industry postdoc. So, and obviously is a, tenured professor at Wake Forest. So it's a super flexible thing. It is part-time. It is less open to international candidates because companies don't typically like to pay the thousands of dollars for a work visa for someone who's going to be a postdoc for just a year. But that's not always the case. But it can be. My decision to apply for postdocs in industry after having completed a postdoc in academia was, again, to get my foot in the door in industry and try to retailor my expertise per se, but ultimately didn't end up needing to go that route.
All right, and there's a couple of questions. I have to move on because we have so many additional questions that we haven't touched upon. So there's a question about when the best time is to start looking for a job when you're in a postdoc, and a related question as to which time frame is more desirable, preferable to go to industry, immediately after PhD, or first do a postdoc and then move to industry. I guess that will be Heather and Justin. So Heather, your turn.
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask this question. I thought that my postdoc was probably one of the most valuable experiences that I've ever had. I am all for the postdoc. I think it at least for the academic postdoc, if you're publishing papers, it gives you the flexibility of being able to go into academia or industry. If you know that industry is for you, I wouldn't suggest if you are going to do a postdoc, I don't think you need to do a long postdoc, or you can just go straight in from your PhD. I guess it depends on what type of position that you want. For our company, the two senior scientists, me and another person, Elena, we both have PhDs in postdoc experience, and you wouldn't even be qualified for that position without at least a little bit of postdoc experience. But it depends on the company and what position you want.
Do you think most companies would rather hire somebody with postdoctoral experience or somebody straight out of PhD? Experience valued, basically.
Yeah.
Or to train their own workers themselves.
No, I think most companies probably just having a PhD is sufficient. I don't know if and I think that there's a lot of advice out there that if you know that you're going to go into industry or that's the route that you want to take, that a postdoc is just a very poorly paid position where you could just be streamlined to working in industry and move your way up faster that way while getting paid a little bit more money. So I'm not sure if that's the best advice or not, but I think I don't think you have to do your postdoc if you want to go for an industry role. Yeah.
I'll just briefly add on to that. You should always be on the job market. At least always have your eye open on what's out there. And if you're a postdoc, day one of your postdoc, you should be on the job market. I'm not saying you have to apply to stuff on day one, but like your job as a postdoc is temporary. And that job as a postdoc is to get you the skills necessary to compete on the job market in whatever field you're going into. To agree with Heather's point, no one in industry is looking for someone with 4 years of postdoc experience. In fact, it will be a detriment to your application, like it was to mine. The first question I got asked anytime I was interviewed was, why are you just now applying to industry? They all thought that I was going to accept their offer, and then in 6 months when I got my academic position, I was going to leave. And that's what they were afraid of. And they don't want to spend money on me for me to leave in 6 months. So I had to convince them, I had to fight uphill to convince them that I was actually willing to change careers and to stay. Whereas had I done a short postdoc, like maybe a year, maybe 2 years, in, let's say I did one in like corn or sorghum or like a plant-based one, then I could actually be really competitive in the plant tech, ag tech space. Or if you do like a short postdoc in some sort of biopharma related activity, But doing a four-year postdoc in basic research in Arabidopsis where you're teaching undergrad, that's not super competitive for the biopharma space. So I got lucky, but yeah, postdocs can be super helpful, but you just got to be strategic about it.
And how important are publications for getting an industry job, both out of grad school and out of postdoc?
Industry only cares about deliverables. So as long as you word them as deliverables, then you're fine. But they're not ever going to read your paper. They're not going to look at the abstract and be like, oh yeah, this is a really good paper. They're going to be like, okay, whatever. Like I think I put my publications at the very end of my resume. Whereas in academia, that's the gold standard. So because that is the deliverable in academia is grants and papers. Whereas in industry, they're not as interested. So obviously you want to have that as an example of a deliverable, but too many scientists will stay in their postdoc until they finish their paper and not apply to industry because this is their baby that they want to get published. And the companies they're applying for do not care if they finish that paper or not. And so it's actually at their own detriment sticking around for another 6 months to a year to finish this paper when you need to move.
All right, I think we are running late. So Julianne, if you want to ask the last question.
Yeah, we wanted to ask, we'll close it out with one last question, which is how do you deal with, or how do you continue to deal with imposter syndrome throughout your academic and professional career?
Can I quickly answer something? I don't know, perhaps it never leaves. It's really hard to deal with that. The way that I deal with this is trying to remind myself why I'm here and the things I've done in the past and I'm currently doing, and how people recognize the merit that I have, and that helps. I don't know, but that's my approach. But I don't know if it will ever leave, at least in academia, from this perspective.
Yeah, I can add more of like a personal note. So this is a tip I learned from, I did a preparing future faculty course at Iowa State, and this is a tip I learned from one of the instructors, is to have a space, maybe a spot in your email, maybe if you're more a written person, a notebook, where you keep a lot of positive things that people have said about your work that make you feel good about yourself. And when you're having a really bad imposter syndrome moment where you feel like everything you do is a failure, nothing you do is right, go and read like one or two of those notes. And it will feel like brand new. And it will remind you that even though you're struggling now, you are worthy and you are worth it. And the work that you do is important. And even to this day, I still have emails from like when I was in this class and I got some good feedback, and I will go read those when like maybe I get some feedback at work that's not great. So that is sort of the one tip I use to try to keep my imposter syndrome at bay, is to realize myself that when I'm at my lowest, that, you know, I am still worthy and I am still worthwhile. So that's my personal tip.
Awesome tip. I need to take that one too. That sounds great. So I think it's time to close out the panel. Joanna, did you want to do that?
Sure, I'll do that. And I was just going to write it in the chat, but I'll just add it to what I've observed over many years of being in this position, which I'm not a faculty member, but I work with faculty members. And so the other thing I would just say for sort of the imposter syndrome, but really any of these jobs, any of these things, this is what I would recommend. And that is to remember that relationships, I think, are the most important. Keeping good relationships as best you can, not with obviously abusive and toxic people, but it's so easy to get focused on like, what is my research? What am I doing in the lab? When am I going to get published? Where can my job be? That I think you can get tunnel vision and forget that, you know, as Justin said, your next job is probably not going to be the one you're going to retire from, but what's going to get you, or as Natalie said, someone cold emailed her because she met someone at a conference. What's going to get you success in life is going to be sort of this fortuitous route you may take. And how are you going to get there? It's not only going to be by you. It's going to be by the relationships that you've built, the networks that you've made, the people that you've worked with, that you've, you know, had a decent relationship and you haven't burned bridges because something didn't go your way. And so part of that relationship skill is have what I think of as your hype team. Have your peer network, have your people that you can text or email or Slack and say, you know, I just got my paper rejected. I feel like crap. Tell me something good about myself. And I've observed this with my colleagues that, you know, they may be what you look as like, you know, full professors, totally successful, et cetera. And they have their group of 5 people that they email who hype them up and say, you know, that rejection doesn't mean you're not worthy, that you are bad. I'm not gonna curse. You are awesome. And just do this for yourself and don't tunnel vision yourself into, I have to do this on my own. I think science is a team sport. It's not, you're not succeeding on your own. You need people, and that includes your family, that includes your friends, that includes your colleagues. And your colleague today in grad school might be on your future hiring committee. They might be the future person that reviews your paper. And so, you know, just lift your gaze up from the lab bench and look around. And also remember, science is an international community. So collaborations should be going all around the world. Anyway, that's it. That's my soapbox. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I really appreciate it. I will post this up into YouTube after I edit some things, and I will share it out. And I would love to hear any feedback that you have on this panel or any future panels. And in the bios, everybody's LinkedIn is there, or Cesar's webpage. So if you do have a follow-up, I'm sure you could message somebody on the call today, and they'd probably take your question. So with that, thank you very much.